Ode to a Nightingale by John Keats is one of a series of odes that Keats has written. In this case, Keats praises the nightingale and the beauty of her singing. The Ode to a Nightingale has 8 stanzas with 10 lines each. The stanzas all have the same basic structure, meter, and rhythm. The lines of each stanza except the 8th are in iambic pentameter. The 8 lines are shorter and only have 6 syllables. The poem has a rhyme scheme that goes A B, C D E, C D E. This poem is written in first person. The speaker, Keats, addresses a nightingale, talking about the beauty of her city, singing, the misery of life, the natural world, and death. The poem is full of allusions to Greek mythology and full of imagery and symbolism. The poem begins with a description of the speaker listening to a song of a nightingale. The song touches him deeply. His heart aches, he says. His senses are numb. He really compares the feeling to taking a drug or sinking to the bottom of the river. The Lethe River, he says, which is a river in Greek mythology that makes people who travel on it forget their memories. In the second part of the first stanza, the speaker addresses the nightingale and compares the song of the nightingale to the sounds of summer and pushes towards the theme of the beauty of nature. The first stanza has a sad atmosphere to it, as the speaker describes his own feelings as a human with a bright and cheerful atmosphere associated with the nightingale. There's also plenty of figurative language. The line, "As though of hemlock I had drunk," is a simile. There's also a metaphor in the line, "Thou, light-winged dryad of the trees." In Greek mythology, a dryad is a tree nymph, which is a spirit that protects the forest. We also see with the line, "Singest of summer in full-throated ease," another metaphor which is comparing the singing to the feel of summer. In the second stanza, the speaker is craving for a draught of vintage, a drink of wine. Again, John Keats uses imagery of nature, describing the wine as cooled in deep in the earth, tasting of flora, flowers and plants, and greens from the countryside. He also compares the taste of the wine to dance and songs from Provence and happiness on a sunny day. The comparison of wine to dance and song is a metaphor that symbolizes the joy and forgetfulness that the song of the nightingale causes him to feel. In the second part of the stanza, he continues craving wine. "And with thee fast away into the forest dim," he says. He wishes to get drunk and fly away with the nightingale into the forest. The imagery continues the bright and sunny atmosphere of the last stanza, which Keats associates with the beautiful song of the nightingale. Moving on to the third stanza, the atmosphere changes. He contrasts the bright and happy song of the nightingale to the sorrows and sad parts of life. He writes that he wishes to forget the weariness, the fever, and the fret. He goes on to describe all sorts of misery. Listening to people groan in pain, shake from palsy as they grow old and grey. He talks about how youth and beauty are bound to disappear and die eventually. He also mentions that any kind of thinking leads people to sadness and depression. All this misery is not known by the nightingale, who just sings happily all day and never gets to experience the feeling of being a human. In the fourth stanza, Keats talks about flying away with the nightingale. He contrasts getting drunk on wine with getting drunk on poetry. In the second part of the stanza, Keats is already flying away with the bird into the night. He personifies the moon as seated on the throne surrounded by stars, but says that deep in the forest where they are flying it is very dark. Again, there is a contrast between light and dark, as well as imagery of nature. In the fifth stanza, it describes the thick and dark forest. Although the speaker cannot see anything, he is surrounded by flowers, soft smells, grass, wild fruit trees, and other plants. The imagery here puts forward feelings of beauty of the natural world. Calling the flower mid-May's eldest child. Keats brings up the theme of death, which he also personifies. He talks about how he often wished to die, and that he was half in love with easeful death. He also mentions his other poetry, saying that he has written a lot about death in the past. As he is flying away with the nightingale through the beautiful dark forest, he feels it is a great time to die a painless death. The stanza gets pretty dark. but death here is almost a relief and joy. He addresses the nightingale and says that once he dies, her song will be played during his mass. In the seventh stanza, Keats talks about how the bird is immortal. It existed since the beginning of time. He imagines all the people through history who listened to this nightingale. He mentions emperors and clowns. He then says, through the sad heart of Ruth, she stood in tears amid the alien corn. Keats makes an allusion to Ruth here, and Ruth is a story from the Bible about a girl who married a man from another country who died. Keats imagines that Ruth is listening to the song of the nightingale when she is working in the field in an alien country. In the last stanza, the nightingale then flies away, and Keats returns to the real world. He says goodbye to the bird as she flies away over the fields, streams, hills, valleys, and meadows. In the end of the poem, the speaker asks a few rhetorical questions, wondering if the experience was just a dream and a fantasy. Was it a vision or a walking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep? In 1819, John Keats composed 6 odes, which are among some of the most famous and well-regarded poems in the English canon. Keats wrote the first 5 poems: Ode on a Grecian Urn, Ode on Indolence, Ode on Melancholy, Ode to a Nightingale, and Ode to Psyche in quick succession during the spring, and he composed 2 autumn in the September of 1819.